Welcome. On the 20th of March, 1970, David Bowie married Mary Angela Barnett, aka Angie. Flush with being a newlywed and the success of his single Space Oddity, a new band, Hype, all of them living in an 11th century English country house, Haddon Hall, set the stage for the recording of David Bowie's third studio album, The Man Who Sold the World. This week on Doug's Music Fun channel. Yeah, fun! In February and March of 1970, demos of The Man Who Sold the World were recorded in a home studio built beneath a stairwell at Haddon Hall. Recording of Man Who Sold the World began at AdVision Studios in April 1970, moving the following week to Trident Studios. In May, the sessions returned to AdVision for the final days. During the move to AdVision, a seismic event occurred that would shape David's future for the years to come. David split with his previous manager, Kenneth Pitt, and began working with Tony Defries, a young litigation clerk who was hired to resolve Kenneth Pitt's contractual obligations, then later quit his clerk job and became Bowie's full-time manager. Even though Defries would be fired later in the decade as David's manager under a cloud of controversy, there is no doubt that he played a pivotal role in David's rise to global superstardom that was starting to accelerate. Tony Visconti recounts that, quote, Angie and Defries are often maligned by critics and cronies of David, but without their constant support and input, there would never have been a Ziggy or an Aladdin or a future Bowie for that matter, end quote. Tony Visconti, Bowie's lifelong producer, this being the second album Visconti produced of Bowie's, complained bitterly about Bowie's apparent lack of interest, or shall we say, sole interest in his new wife Angela and not the recording sessions. Quote, I told David that you're going to have to throw some lyrics on these songs and vocals. I was infuriated with him. Really, the album was me and Mick Ronson. David wasn't there, end quote. Once again, I owe a big debt of gratitude for the best book I've read on David Bowie, Nicholas Pegg's The Complete David Bowie. Pegg recounts this tale and notes that these words are perhaps not entirely fair. Two songs on the album, The Width of a Circle and The Supermen, were, quote, certainly in existence before the sessions began, as was the basic melody of black country rock, end quote. Bowie himself noted in 1998 that, quote, I really did object to the impression given in some articles that I did not write the songs. You only have to check out the chord changes. No one writes chord changes like that, end quote. Tony Visconti, frustrated with David, quit at the end of the studio sessions for the album and went on to produce Mark Bolan of T-Rex, among others. He wouldn't see Bowie for 3 years, but came back to produce and collaborate on some of Bowie's best albums. The Man Who Sold the World is a dark, heavy album. I think it's safe to attribute the heavy aspect to Mick Ronson's hard guitar and the overall arrangements of Mick Ronson and Tony Visconti. Visconti related that, quote, Mick's idols were cream. He coached Woody to play like Ginger Baker and me to play like Jack Bruce. David was loving the sound of his new band, end quote. I love the sound too. Hard and heavy with that Bowie swagger coming through it all. Various factors attributed to the dark, unstable lyrics Bowie penned, not the least of which was his half-brother, Terry Burns, deteriorating mental health during the time of the recording. In 1999, Bowie related how he'd been, quote, seeing quite a bit of my half-brother during that period, and I think a lot of it obviously, had been working on me. I think his shadow is on quite a lot of the material in a way. Knowing about the fragility of mental stability in my family generally, on my mother's side particularly, I think I was going through an awful lot of concern about exactly what my mental condition was and where it may lead." End quote. Let's discuss the 3 album covers this album has had. The first album cover was designed by Bowie's friend Mike Weller. This is a cartoonish cover with a cowboy-looking character on the front, and in my opinion, it's pretty awful. Weller reports that David was pleased, but David changed his mind and persuaded his financial backer, Keith Phillips, to have Phillips's art department commission Keith McMillan to photograph him in the Haddon Hall living room in a dress. This is the cover that is popularly considered the original cover, although that is not the case. It is also used on the Ryko re-releases of this album, and the Ryko, again, is the best release I've heard to date. Nicholas Pegg relates in his bio that quote, "the photo, overlaid with a canvas texture, was intended to mimic the style of the pre-Raphaelite painter Dante Gabriel Rossetti. At the time, it was a deeply provocative image and the most brazen enactment of gender confusion Bowie had yet undertaken." End quote. The dress photograph was quickly rejected by Mercury in America. Instead, they used Weller's cartoon artwork with a speech bubble blanked out. It contained the line, quote, "roll up your sleeves and show us your arms," end quote, a pun on guns and drug use that also proved too much for Mercury, so they made the cover even dumber by just blanking it out. They also changed the title of the album from Bowie's chosen title, Metropolis, alluding to Fritz Lang's masterpiece, Metropolis, to The Man Who Sold the World. David was furious about these changes, and he successfully persuaded Mercury to use the dress photograph on the UK release. When the RCA reissued the album in 1972, both countries replaced the sleeve with a black and white photograph by Brian Ward. Now, I think given the mood of the album, this black and white photograph actually does suit it better, but perhaps it's just what I'm used to because it's the version I have, although I do love the dress photograph. In any event, the album was not a huge success on its initial release, but did receive enough critical praise for Mercury to launch a promotional tour in February 1971, where it had sold better and was received more favorably by critics. This was David's first trip to the States. Let's look at the personnel on the record. David Bowie on vocals and guitar, Mick Ronson on guitar, Tony Visconti on bass, piano, and guitar, Mick Woodmansey on drums, Ralph Mace on the Moog synthesizer. Let's also take a closer look into each of the tracks on the album. The album leads off with The Width of a Circle. This song stakes the ground for the rest of the album. Very Bowie-esque, strange, folky, acoustic intro that leads into a heavy, feedback-drenched guitar riff thundering along with Visconti's bass, a highlight to me on this record, and expertly drummed and counterpunched with Woodmansey's drums. Man, I love this heavy Bowie sound, and although David distanced himself from it a bit and would return to a more acoustic tone on his following album, Hunky Dory, this and Ziggy Stardust's heavier tone pairs extremely well with Bowie's swagger, glam, and strange lyrics. Bowie noted in a 1971 interview for Disc and Music Echo that he did not have a, quote, very strong feeling for heavy music. I don't. In fact, I think it's fairly primitive as a music form. I look for sensation rather than quality, and heavy music seems to be full of musicians who have quality rather than who, for some reasons, can chill your spine, end quote. Fair enough, David, and I would agree that the following Hunky Dory does have some spine-chilly moments, as does this record. However, I digress. Much focus can be shined upon David's lyrics in this, and the rest of the songs of this album, and I don't think I'm going to go down that rabbit hole particularly. His half-brother's Terry decline in mental health, Nietzsche, Khalil Gibran, and other themes run throughout these dark, cryptic lyrics, but my own days as a pot-smoking seer into the netherworld are long over. Not that you have to be a pot-smoking seer into the netherworlds to analyze these lyrics, it's just that I no longer have the desire to ponder them like I might have when I was much younger. Width of a Circle was never released as a single, but played a role in the Ziggy Stardust and Diamond Dogs tours to follow. I wish I could have seen the Ziggy Stardust tour when the break in the middle of the song was expanded into an extended jam, David departing from the stage for a costume change in what Peg related as, quote, an almost shamanic cacophony of strobe lights, feedback, and drums, end quote, with an extended Mick Ronson solo. You can see and hear this on the Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, the motion picture, although the DVD is currently out of print. I'm hoping someone finds it profitable enough to remaster it in at least Blu-ray, if not 4K. You can still stream it, however, through one of Amazon Prime's third-party services, Quello Concerts. I think that's how it's pronounced. The link is in the description. Next up is All the Madmen. David noting that the song was written for and about his brother. In the lyrics, David relates how he feels that, quote, all the madmen are just as sane as me, end quote, and how he'd rather be with them than, quote, the sad men roaming free, end quote. An interesting literary influence on David was Jack Kerouac, whom he was introduced to by his brother. One of the key passages out of Kerouac's classic On the Road is the similarity of his sentiments with Bowie's. Quoting from On the Road, quote, the only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time, end quote. Musically, this has Bowie's acoustic guitar, a creepy riff that kind of sounds like a calliope, and then the power trio of Visconti, Ronson, and Woodmansey adding some heavy textures. One thing I'd like to note is how a simple touch in the song, where everyone changes to playing a sort of shufflet triplet passage, causes the song to almost feel like another whole section has been created. It adds variety without breaking the flow. This is around the 3-minute, 9-second mark, the here I stand, foot in hand, listening to my wall portion of the lyrics. There are quite a few such flourishes like this, all making the song more interesting and breaking up the monotony. I bring this up as something of a wistful remembrance of days past when songwriting and composition were prioritized over the production of a record. It just seems that now there are too many songs with two-note melodies, not to mention a decline in actual choruses, verses, or bridges. I'm not trying to imply that if you don't have traditional compositional elements of a song, it's automatically bad, but you have to have something to make it interesting. Anyhow, I'll get off my old man soapbox, but I really just wanted to say that listening to songs like this makes me appreciate songcraft and everyone involved putting in time and energy to make a song interesting. To finish this musical asylum of a song, in 1970, an edited promo single was pressed that omitted the spoken passage. This was used in the US prior to Bowie's tour. A US single with Janine as a B-side was also pressed, but was later withdrawn and is extremely rare. On to the third song on side A, Black Country Rock. Again, love the Bowie vocal and power trio hard rock sound, a little tighter and funkier on this track. Visconti recounts how Bowie had run out of lyrics on this and did a Mark Bolan vocal impression as a joke, but everyone liked it, so they recorded it and it made it onto the record. Departing from the heavy, pulsing rock sound, side A concludes with After All, moving into a hallucinatory waltz with strange voices calling out, "Oh, by Jingo," and the haunted calliope making another appearance. The song is another example of what Peg calls, quote, early Bowie territory, paranoia, inadequacy, and isolation, in an intensely withdrawn style reeking of suburban repression, end quote. Side B begins with Running Gun Blues, a particularly disturbing song, again reflecting on mental illness, wherein Bowie adopts a persona of an unhinged Vietnam veteran on a killing spree. Peg posits that this was probably inspired by the high-profile court-martial of Lieutenant William Calley, who was convicted of the murder of 22 unarmed Vietnamese civilians during the infamous My Lai massacre in March 1968. On the next track, Saviour Machine, Bowie returns to the theme of leadership run amok, recounts the rise of President Joe and the building of a supercomputer called The Prayer, which turns on its creators. Angela Bowie recounts this being another song where Visconti had to pressure Bowie to get lyrics written, and Bowie staying up into the early hours of a morning to finish it. This song initially was entitled The Man Who Sold the World, but was discarded before putting it on the song we now know as The Man Who Sold the World, the last song on the album to receive lyrics. Tony Visconti has high praise for the next song, She Shook Me Cold, referring to it as a classic moment and parts of it leaving him, quote, smiling from ear to ear. I don't agree and think this is one of the lesser songs on the record. It is competent enough, but I guess there's always a worse song on the record for everyone, right? To my ears, this is it. It seems that it was rushed by almost everyone involved and thrown together. Most famously covered by Nirvana, The Man Who Sold the World has become cemented in the Bowie discography as a classic, even if some people are still unaware Bowie wrote it. Peg relates a funny recounting of David discussing this. Quote, in America, especially when I do The Man Who Sold the World, the amount of kids that would come up afterwards and say, it's cool you're doing a Nirvana song. And I think, fuck you, you little tosser. End quote. Bowie revamped the song a few times, including a trip-hop revamp for the Outside Tour, which was later recorded in the studio, mixed by Brian Eno for release as a double A-side. An acoustic version, closer to the original, was recorded for Bowie's Bridge School benefit appearances in 1996, along with a wonderful version of Heroes, by the way, and again for his BBC session for the documentary Changes Now Bowie. Both Eno's mix and David's acoustic version can be found on the 6-track 2020 EP, Is It Any Wonder? The album concludes with The Supermen. Bowie again revisiting Nietzschean themes lyrically, while musically echoing Richard Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra, used as a source for 2001 A Space Odyssey, a film that Bowie also took for inspiration. Bowie had been reading Nietzsche throughout 1970, and allusions and themes can be found throughout this record, as well as his fourth studio album, Hunky Dory. Nietzsche's Superman rejects morality, Bowie laying various fairy tale visions alongside, recalling the mountain magic from Wild-Eyed Boy from Free Cloud on the album Space Oddity. From Peg's book, Bowie is quoted in 1970 that he, quote, was still going through the thing when I was pretending I understood Nietzsche, and I had tried to translate it into my own terms to understand it, so Supermen came out of that, end quote. Various versions were performed and recorded. A radically rearranged version was recorded during the Ziggy Stardust sessions. This rearranged version appears on the 1972 Revelations compilation, as well as on the 1990 Ryko Hunky Dory release as a bonus track. In Strange Fascination, a Bowie biography penned by David Buckley, Visconti describes the album version as one of the recording's, quote, outrageous sonic landscapes, kind of prescient for the sound that Queen eventually came up with. Not only the vocal style, but the high-pitched backing vocals and the guitar solo too, end quote. So, there are the tracks. A wild, unsettling, and perplexing at times recording. A gumbo of mental illness, Nietzsche, social upheaval, and hard rock power trio. I believe Rolling Stone noted that if you can handle the schizophrenia in the album, you're along for a great ride. In any event, it was a watershed moment for David, with Visconti leaving for 3 years afterwards, being replaced on bass with Trevor Bolder, who, along with Ronson and Woodmansey, would become the next Bowie band iteration, the Spiders from Mars. So, that's all I have to say right now about this record. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.